Good morning. Welcome back to This McCrazy Wife. This summer here in Northeast Ohio has been a very hot and humid summer. We've had a lot of temperatures in the high 80s, even low 90s with real feels of 100. We've had a lot of very humid days. So it's been good days for the swimming pool, but not really a lot for just kind of being outside. So last week we had some beautiful fall type temperatures. So I got myself a nice cup of coffee and I headed out into the garden to see what was happening. So again, we have not had a lot of rain this summer, so it has made it a little tough on some things. But for the most part, things are still doing pretty good. But I went out this morning to see if I could harvest some zucchini. Now, during the summer, I try very hard not to turn on the stove or the oven because even with the air conditioning, it just makes it so hot in here. So, when I had some nice weather, I thought this will be the perfect day to use up some of the zucchini in the garden and make some zucchini bread and also make some zucchini cake. But while I was out in the garden, I decided to check on these Jack Be Little pumpkins. Now, this is our first year for growing these Jack Be Littles, and they have been so much fun. Now, we also did some jack o' lantern pumpkins and the just your traditional types of pumpkins. Those we've already harvested, and they're just finishing ripening and curing and all that. Again, because of so little rain, some of the plants have really struggled. And though I've watered every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, there's nothing quite like rain to help the garden. So, also on this day, I decided to check in on our green beans. Now, we have already harvested a couple rounds of green beans. So, our plants will probably be finishing up here pretty soon. That was something I didn't know about green beans, that I guess they only produce for a few weeks at a time, these bush ones. And so some people plant them in succession. I didn't know that, so I didn't do that. But we have gotten quite a few nice green beans off of these plants. In fact, this is Sunday morning that I'm recording this voiceover, and I just went out and picked a whole bunch more this morning. So we have definitely been enjoying having all of these delicious green beans in the garden. I've only been gardening for, I think this is maybe my third year, um, maybe fourth, but I think it's just my third year. I still have so much to learn about gardening. It is very much a trial and error process, deciding what works for us and what isn't going to work for us, and what I found that our family just really doesn't eat enough of to have in the garden. So, very much a work in progress, but one that we have been enjoying very much. So, after I had harvested everything, it was time to head into the kitchen and start baking. Now, I have a couple recipes that I'm doing today. One is for mom's zucchini bread, that is an all recipes recipe. And then one is in this Hope's Table cookbook for a chocolate zucchini bars, but it's more like a cake. It was absolutely delicious. We loved it. I highly recommend that you get this cookbook. And if you don't want to buy the cookbook, I recommend you get it from your library. Check it out and see if it's something that makes it worth the money for you. For me, it was. But I like to do that a lot with cookbooks. I just will get them at the library and then decide if it's worth spending my money on. So I'm starting off by prepping my zucchini. I choose not to peel my zucchini. Nobody in my family minds that you have those extra darker green specks, and I feel like it's just better for us since I think the fiber's in the peel. Anyways, I got all of that shredded, and I'm starting off with 2 cups of that zucchini for these chocolate zucchini bars. I'm then adding in 1.5 cups of sugar. Now I'm using a half cup measure here. Usually I try to just do a little bit less than what it says. So I put in most of the sugar it called for, but not quite a full cup and a half. Then it called for a half of a cup of oil, which I almost always will substitute applesauce instead of the oil. It in my opinion, it does change your texture a little bit, but not enough to make a difference, and I just feel like it's a little bit better for us. Next, we're adding in our dry ingredients. I'm choosing just to measure this right into like a sifter right on top of my mixing bowl rather than mix it in a separate bowl. We're adding in 2 cups of all purpose flour. I choose to use the unbleached. Then we're adding in a half of a cup of cocoa powder, 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of salt. And then I'm just going to go ahead and sift those right into my mixing bowl. Now it's just time to go ahead and give it a mix. As with any cake, you don't want to over mix it, but you want to make sure you get it mixed in enough. Then I decided that I needed to add in a splash of vanilla because it didn't call for vanilla and somehow that just didn't seem right to me. So I put in the tiniest splash that now that I'm looking at it hardly seemed worth my time, but I did it anyways. I have already greased the bottom and probably the sides too of a 9 by 13 baking dish. I've had this Pampered Chef dish for probably 13 or 14 years. I absolutely love this thing. But bakes really, really well. You could probably use a glass pan too if you prefer. This is just what I like. But this is going to bake in a 350-degree oven for 30 minutes. It did take exactly 30 minutes right on the nose. I was afraid when I took it out, maybe it had overcooked, but it ended up being perfect. While the cake was baking, I went ahead and started the zucchini bread recipe. Again, this is called Mom's Zucchini Bread on allrecipes.com. I do choose to double this recipe so that I get 4 loaves of this bread because I like to throw 3 of them into the freezer. It freezes really well, and then we have plenty for the coming weeks. But we're starting off by mixing together our wet ingredients, which is 3 large eggs, 1 cup of oil, though again, I'm choosing to use applesauce. And then the recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups of sugar. And I feel like that is unnecessary. So I put in 1 1/2 cups of sugar, and it is more than enough sugar. I also added in a tablespoon of vanilla extract. Now, again, I doubled this recipe, so I added in 6 eggs and 2 cups of applesauce, etc. So now I'm just mixing everything together. I'm getting all of these wet ingredients blended up really, really well. The recipe actually says to beat it well as though I would be using a mixer, but I don't choose to do that. I don't want to dirty a mixer, and this works just fine. So that I'm just going to make sure everything is well combined. Now I'm going to sift in my dry ingredients again right over top of my mixing bowl. Now my sifter is not big enough to put what is this? Is going to have 3 cups of all-purpose flour, which would mean 6 cups of flour since I'm doubling it. So I do 1 batch of the dry ingredients, sift it in, and then I do the second batch of dry ingredients. And I feel like it kind of gives it a little mix to start with. So it's 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1 tablespoon of ground cinnamon. So I already sifted in my first round of those dry ingredients. Now I'm going to sift in my second round of the dry ingredients. I think one of my favorite things about this recipe is how much cinnamon is in this. It just has the best flavor. It is so good. And then because I choose not to grate my zucchini, I just feel like it looks really pretty when you slice the bread and you can see those dark green specks in it. You can't taste the peel. So it's not going to mess up your zucchini bread if you choose not to peel your zucchini. And if it's in good condition, I really don't see any reason to take the time to peel it. It makes it a lot easier this way. So now we're adding in our 2 cups of grated zucchini, and we're just going to give that a gentle stir, but make sure it's well mixed in. The recipe calls for 1 cup of chopped walnuts. I don't like walnuts, and my family doesn't like really any kind of nut in bread. So I just choose to leave that out. I have 4 loaf pans that have been greased and they are ready to add the batter to. I try to keep it pretty even, so you will notice I was using a measuring cup to start portioning that out, but then I just kind of eyeball it from there. I put them all into the oven. These went in at 325 degrees. It says they will bake for 40 to 60 minutes. You'll notice I open my oven and I go ahead and rotate all of my pans. Since I have 4 pans in there, I wanna make sure they're well rotated, and I just keep checking on them to see if they're finished. So now we're moving back to the chocolate zucchini bars, and we are gonna make the whipped ganache frosting. Basically, you're making ganache, you're letting it cool, and then you're just gonna mix it up with a mixer to get that nice just whipped flavor, whipped texture, I'm sorry, that is so good. So you're starting off with 1 cup of it calls for semi-sweet chocolate chips. I used mostly dark chocolate chips with a little bit of semi-sweet. It was perfect. And then a half a cup of heavy cream. Now here you're gonna see I just kept testing the bread. My pans are different, so 2 of them are gonna finish before the other 2 do. It's really important you just check every loaf that you have in the oven because things do bake differently depending on the loaf pan that they're in. So now I'm stirring up the chocolate chips and the heavy cream, popping it into the microwave for 30-second increments. You can do this over a double boiler if you want. I find it is really easy to do this in the microwave as long as you have patience and you really just want to do 30 seconds at a time, stirring it in between each one because you can burn chocolate. I have done it before. It will be ruined and you don't want to do that. So 30 seconds, stir it, 30 seconds, stir it. And I think this only took like 2 times of that in the microwave. I think it took 1 minute and it was done. At this point, I am pulling the rest of our zucchini loaves out of the oven and putting them on the cooling rack here to cool. The kitchen smells incredible at this time, and I cannot wait to start eating that zucchini bread and this zucchini cake. So my ganache is it's melted and it's mixed. And now I'm going to take a piece of plastic wrap and I'm going to press it to the surface of my ganache. Now, I learned this trick several years ago when I baked a lot of cakes, and it can keep it from kind of getting a film on the top, almost like cooked pudding will do. So I like to just press that to the top. This was not hot at all, so I wasn't worried it was going to melt it. But then we're going to put that in the refrigerator and let it set up for a little bit. You do not want this to become super hard. You just want it to be completely cool and a bit firm. Then I pull it out of the refrigerator and I'm going to start mixing it with my hand mixer. It's amazing how fast this went from that dark chocolate ganache to this beautiful whipped icing. And I'll be honest, I am not a frosting lover. I don't love buttercream frosting because it is so sweet. And a lot of times I just don't care for frosting. But this was the most delicious frosting I think I have ever had. My family loved this frosting, and they're not real big frosting lovers either. So it was just perfect with that dark chocolate and then whipping up that ganache. It was delicious. So I am just frosting this cake. I probably took longer to do this part than I needed to, but I think that is just because, like I said, I used to make cakes a lot and I like things to look pretty. So, I finished that, and let me tell you, this cake was phenomenal. This bread is so good. I was able to, like I said, freeze 3 of those loaves, and I think we have 1 loaf left now. I'm doing this voiceover about a week after I did these recipes. But I went ahead and cut this cake into 12 pieces. Partly because I am doing Weight Watchers and I wanted to be able to keep this as low points as I could, which, in all honesty, this is not low points. This was 16 points on Weight Watchers for 1 piece of it, but it was absolutely worth it. It was so delicious. Now, you may have noticed that this cake did not have eggs in it, so it has a different texture than your typical chocolate cakes. But this was probably my favorite cake I've ever eaten. It was just the texture was fantastic, the taste was incredible, just a deep chocolate, so delicious. So I hope this gave you a couple of fun ideas for that extra zucchini that's in your garden. I hope you're having a wonderful summer, and thanks again for watching this McCrazy Wife.